Expungement is important to me so that I can make a living wage for my family. There is stigma tied to the conviction, and I am a person that believes that human beings are redeemable.
There are consequences for a person's actions, and that person needs to be ready to live with those consequences for their actions. And what that law says is that the consequences go away as long as you're good for a while.
You can't judge somebody by their past. God is the only one out here that can judge somebody like that. People learn from their mistakes. They're trying to do better. They really are trying. Give them the benefit of doubt and let them try.
It's estimated that in 2019, 492,000 adults in West Virginia had a criminal record. The West Virginia Center for Budget and Policy reports that's about 27% of the state's population. The number includes arrests that may not have led to a conviction, but still show up on a background check. When someone must acknowledge their criminal record on a job or housing application, that can close the door to opportunities. In turn, that can prevent the footholds of a stable lifestyle and lead to recidivism. As a result, nearly every state now has some kind of policy to expunge or seal a criminal record. The laws vary widely based on the severity of the crime, but they can erase a record once a certain amount of time has passed. In the past 6 years, 10 states have set up automatic systems that initiate the expungement process for some crimes. Today, we look at West Virginia's expungement process to see how it works, where some people say it still falls short, and hear from those who worry about the dangers of expungement. From West Virginia Public Broadcasting and PRX, this is Us and Them, the show that tells the stories about the things that divide us and bring us together. I'm Trey Kay.
My name is Marie Bechtel. I am a lawyer with Legal Aid of West Virginia. I am specifically funded through the state of West Virginia's Jobs and Hope program to work with people who are in reentry or who are otherwise looking to overcome barriers to employment.
The work that Marie Bechtel does, helping people with expungement cases, is only a small part of what Legal Aid does. Since 2018, they've taken on approximately 1,200 expungement cases.
My clients are referred to me statewide through the states, through those Jobs and Hope transition agents. They are my grant partners, so they're the ones who send me cases. Generally, they are people who are in reentry, although not always, and who are struggling with finding employment because of their criminal history or their justice involvement.
The Jobs and Hope program was established in 2019 by Governor Jim Justice and the West Virginia legislature. It offers education and job training for people recovering from substance use disorder.
Just to be clear, when you say reentry, they've come out of incarceration, they're reentering back into society.
Sometimes they're coming off of a period of probation and were never actually incarcerated. The assistance that I can provide to them really depends on where they are in that process and how much time has passed depending on their particular set of circumstances, because the statute that allows for expungement has a lot of variables in it.
Those variables set out the kind of crimes that are eligible for expungement. Bechtel explains the guidelines are very detailed, and there are many crimes that cannot be cleared or sealed from someone's record.
DUIs cannot be expunged. Driving on a suspended or revoked license is an ineligible offense. Anything that is domestic violence related, if they have lived together, either before or after. Any sort of what we would term a crime of violence is going to be ineligible. So that would be murder, rape, robbery, things of that nature. Burglary of a home, for example, is excluded. Any crime in which a firearm was used, any crime in which a child was a victim. 70% of the people that I am not able to help successfully obtain an expungement will not ever be able to successfully obtain an expungement because the convictions that they have are not eligible by statute, or they have so many convictions that they would only ever be able to obtain at most a partial expungement. If, for example, an individual has multiple felonies convictions over a period of time, our law only allows the expungement of one felony or series of felonies from the same transaction. And so one of the considerations I have to make when I'm determining the level of service that we will provide to that individual is, if we are able to obtain an expungement, are you still going to have such a criminal record that is going to show up on background checks that we've obtained a moral victory, but we haven't been able to obtain a practical victory that's going to enable you to achieve better employment?
Is it straightforward? Can a person figure it out and pretty much go through the process representing themselves?
If they have a misdemeanor conviction or even a few misdemeanor convictions in one county, it would be pretty simple to get that expunged on their own. If they have a felony conviction or if they have multiple counties involved, it would be much more difficult to navigate that process on their own.
Why is that?
The statute, the way it reads, when it references what particular convictions are excluded from eligibility for expungement, references them by statute number. And so that just makes it a little bit more difficult for a layperson to follow that, because it doesn't say, if they were convicted of first-degree murder, that's not eligible. It references the statute for murder. So it takes a lot of cross-referencing, which makes it more challenging. And a big part of expungements are, in very few circumstances, are an individual entitled to an expungement. Most of them, the vast majority, are at the discretion of the court. And the petitioner who is seeking the expungement has an affirmative obligation to provide evidence to the court that they are a law-abiding and rehabilitated individual since whatever it is happened that they seek to expunge.
In other words, Bechtel and her client must convince a judge. And the numbers show, despite new laws, making the case for expungement is a challenge. Since 2018, Legal Aid has heard from about 1,200 people who wanted their records sealed. Nearly 70% of those cases were not eligible. Bechtel says judges have granted expungement for only about 7% of the legal aid cases. That's about 80 people in 5 years. When Bechtel takes on a client at Legal Aid, she sends them a 4-page checklist of things they need to gather, including copies of their criminal record, at least 2 letters of support from family, employers, or members of the community, and any certificates of completion they may have from recovery or job readiness programs.
Is there a timeline?
There is a timeline that is set by statute, and it's a variable timeline, and it depends on what they've been convicted of. For example, for an individual who's been convicted of a single misdemeanor, then they only have to wait 1 year after completing their sentence before they are eligible to file. If they've been convicted of a felony, it's a 5-year wait after completing their sentence. But if they have been diagnosed with a substance use disorder and have completed or are substantially compliant with a long-term drug rehab program, and we can provide proof of that, or whether or not they've ever had any kind of diagnosed substance use disorder. If they have completed a West Virginia Department of Education approved job training program, then you can reduce each of those wait times down.
You mentioned DUI or driving with a suspended license or burglary of a home. And those are convictions that are not eligible for expungement. I'm wondering if there might be any way for relief for those people, because I would feel like there would be a lot of people who fit into that category. Am I right?
You are correct, yes.
There's something that seems kind of tragic about that. It's a punishment after they've served their time and after they've done things to really rehabilitate themselves and make themselves, a good standing citizen.
I agree with you. And we try very hard to not tell clients, oh, sorry, you're not eligible under the statute, nothing we could do, go on about your life. But really try to address them as the individual that they are and talk about what exactly is it that they are specifically trying to achieve and talking about other ways to achieve that end. So, for example, I often spend a lot of time talking with individuals about if they want to work in a hospital, for example. Well, what kinds of jobs would be available there that they would not have to undergo this certain kind of training or this certain kind of background check? Or we talk about volunteering in the kind of business or field that they really want to enter so that the employer they really want to work for gets to know them as the individual, not them as their record. But that's the hump we really try to help people overcome is how can we really help you get from where you are to where you want to be?
West Virginia has an eligible worker shortage, that there are jobs that the state needs people to do, and there are people, but in some cases, they can't pass a criminal background check. Isn't there an economic impact to this as well?
Absolutely. There certainly is. And I do think the legislature was looking to that economic impact when in 2023 they passed the statute that allows for the automatic sealing of some CPS substantiations.
CPS cases involve the Department of Child Protective Services. Marie Bechtel says the revised state law has expanded the kind of jobs some people are eligible for. Under the old law, the record of a call to CPS could block a person from some jobs, even if there was never a case filed.
If you and your partner got into an argument and you had children in the home, and it was a verbal argument, but an ugly verbal argument, and your neighbor heard and called the police or called CPS, and they responded, CPS investigated, found that there were sufficient issues that could potentially harm the child, that they substantiate the allegation, meaning they make a finding that there is a potential harm to this child. That would remain on your record forever, even though a case was never filed against you, even though your children were never removed from your home. And if 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road, you went to go apply for a job in a daycare and they ran a background check through West Virginia Cares, then it would show on your record that you had this substantiation and you would not be able to obtain that employment. And so in that situation, so long as you did not have a second substantiated allegation by CPS within 1 year of that first substantiation, that is an example of something that would be automatically sealed.
I asked Bechtel to clarify just what a change to someone's criminal record does. Is it deleted entirely?
So with the sealing, for example, that would just simply mean that in this instance, if the background check was requested, it would not show, but that record would still exist. And insofar as the criminal record expungement is concerned, even though we do use the term expunge, those records are not gone. There are some instances where certain individuals can look behind the expungement order, look behind the expungement itself, and see those records again. They will not generally appear on most background checks, but they do still appear on some background checks. For example, if you applied for a job working as a police officer or as a corrections officer, or you applied for a private investigator's license, any of those could look behind an expungement because the legislature determined it was important to know an individual working in those professions, to know their full history.
Why is it important for many of these people to have their records expunged?
For some, it's a moral victory. It's very powerful to either stand in the same courtroom or even just have a judge sign an order saying, we recognize where you were that time ago, and we recognize all of the effort and the change that you have brought about in your own life over this period of time and who you are now. Time and again, I've seen the impact that has had on clients, and it would be difficult for me to overstate it. It's enormously powerful in their lives.
What percentage of cases that go before a court are granted expungement?
I don't know statistically around the state. I can only tell you about the ones that I file. And this would go to the screening that I do and the preparation work that I do with clients, and why it takes so long to bring a client to the point of being able to file the petition to bring before the court, because I don't do these in a half-baked manner. I make sure that we are overshooting the goal before we walk in the courthouse doors, so to speak, to file the petition, because I owe that to my clients. This is a hard process for them, and I am not going to put them through this unless I am confident either that we will obtain this expungement or that we have a very, very good chance of doing it. And until we can tick every single box and provide the court with every bit of documentation that the statute says that we need to, I'm not bringing these petitions. I have only had 3 or 4 expungements denied, but I will say that most of them, the judge, I don't think was inherently opposed to granting expungements. It was their interpretation of the statute that I don't think was necessarily incorrect. They were just reading it in a more black and white way than other judges do. It's a highly nuanced statute. It truly is. And I'm thinking of one case in particular where, I did not have, it was not a county that I traditionally practice in. I thought the judge was very thoughtful and listened to our petition and our arguments, and then just fundamentally said, his interpretation of the statute was that he had no choice but to deny it. And I understood why he thought that. I disagreed with him on my client's behalf, but I don't think he was wrong either.
How big of a problem is this in West Virginia, the need for people to have their records expunged?
It's an enormous issue. And while it's the nature of the grant that I work under at Legal Aid, that it's statewide, I can tell you that we have attorneys in all 12 of our offices who do expungement work under different grants. And just based on what I hear from my colleagues around the state, it simply is a very significant issue.
Since judges make the call on expungement cases, I thought I would reach out to Carrie Webster. She's a judge on the 8th Circuit Court.
We are general jurisdiction judges, which means we hear just about everything. We hear criminal cases, civil cases. We hear appeals on certain family court matters like domestic violence orders, for example. And, of course, we handle expungements.
Judge Webster says the number of expungement cases that come before her court is on the rise, but she still only sees about 30 cases a year.
When you are mulling this over as to what to do, what's your chief concern? What is the thing that you're most concerned about in the decision that you make?
The nature of the offense that they're seeking expungement, I rely on the prosecutor to determine eligibility. And sometimes I'll double check that because I may look at it differently, but typically prosecutor will provide the criminal history. So the nature of the offense, the person's entire criminal history, and the passage of time between time that they were charged with the offense they're seeking expungement, whether it was an arrest that resulted in a dismissal or a conviction. And then I look at what they are doing now and if I can establish that, whether it be through letters or some form of employment. And the reason for it, a lot of times it's for employment. Sometimes it's because, I'm ashamed. I was 24 years old and, I got off on the wrong side of the track and, I ended up being with the wrong crowd and I got a drug conviction. And now I'm, 45 years old. I've got 2 children and, I hate to tell them that their dad's a convicted felon. And I've worked, for the last 15 years with a union. I haven't touched drugs in, 10 years. I've got steady employment. Those are the kinds of cases where I may expunge a felony. And I've expunged just a couple felony convictions where the majority, unbelievably, are sometimes arrest, even when there's not been a conviction. They just want their arrest expunged.
Let me just stop you right there. So you're saying that you have granted only a few expungements of felonies, and more of the expungements that you've granted is charges that are on somebody's record.
The majority of people that are seeking expungement are people that have shoplifting charges. Again, charges versus conviction. What I'm seeing more than I used to, and it really begs several questions in need of answers. Why are people presumably being denied employment because they have an arrest or 3 arrests on the record as opposed to convictions? And I've said I wonder if whoever is reading these criminal background checks think they're convictions or just don't want to hire anybody that has any criminal history. And that's a question for the business community and for those that generate criminal background checks and for those that read them. Are you talking about somebody at a Go-Mart? Do they have a huge HR department? Or is it just the assistant manager reading it? Because it's not realistic anymore, particularly in jobs that are minimum wage or without benefits. There are a lot of people in our society that have convictions and that have absolutely been arrested. But if somebody has been arrested and has a long rap sheet and they come in and they're seeking expungement of one thing, a lot of times they don't realize that they had a lot of other charges. So it's like, okay, I may consider expunging this one distinct one, but buddy, you've got 7 other charges that they didn't even know about. And that might be because the person that they interviewed with said it's this particular charge or conviction that's causing the problem.
In addition, Judge Webster says the background checks generated by some companies can be extremely complicated to read.
If those background checks that employers get are even half as un-user-friendly as the ones we get are, then you just almost want to throw up your hands and say, I can't read this, because that is something that prosecutors and judges alike, law enforcement will tell you, it is so hard to read these criminal histories.
Even when a person is successful in getting their record expunged, Marie Bechtel of Legal Aid says there can still be hurdles finding work.
I always remind clients of when we are successful in obtaining an expungement is having a record does not put you in a protected class. And by that, I mean, if you apply for a job and your employer runs background checks through a certain background check company, but they have to pay for an update to that background check company's database. And they only do that every 6 months, okay, which is not uncommon. But you apply for a job with an employer who hasn't paid for an update to the database that they use to run their background checks through. And so it still comes back as you have a conviction. And they say, we're not going to give you this position because you lied to us. And you say, I didn't lie. I have an expungement order. Here's what it says. West Virginia law says I don't have to disclose this because I've successfully obtained an expungement. But the employer knows that you had this in your past, and they still choose to deny you a job for that. You don't have recourse. And so it feels like constant cleanup with these cases, that even though we achieve the expungement and we achieve the processing of the expungement and we do all the things, it's still hanging out there. There's always this possibility that somebody's going to run a Google search and find it that way, or the employer you apply for a job through hasn't paid for an update on their database that they run their background checks through, or it's like it's always out there waiting to still catch you. And that's the hardest thing for people, is having this, it's still hanging over their heads.
After a break, we'll hear from people with very different experiences getting their records expunged, and with a politician who encourages caution.
With passing that law, we have codified, we have made it okay. The government says it is okay for you to lie, even though it poses significant risk.
I'm Trey Kay, and you're listening to Us and Them. Our show is supported in part by the West Virginia Humanities Council, the CRC Foundation, and the Daywood Foundation.
In difficult times, music gives us peace, brings us together, and helps heal us. It calms our nerves and brightens our days. That's why we're bringing you classic episodes of Mountain Stage on air and in our podcast. This is Larry Gross, host of Mountain Stage. Find something that's familiar or brand new and feel the power of live music on our website, mountainstage.org.
Hey, I'm Trey Kay, and this is Us and Them from PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. While expunging a criminal record can be a great relief to some people, many cases are simply not eligible. 37-year-old Amber Blankenship hoped to expunge her criminal record. However, West Virginia law says Blankenship could only expunge one of her 2 felonies, since they occurred at different times. Legal Aid did not take her case because she would still have a felony on her record. Blankenship says obtaining an expungement is more than just getting a clean slate. She says despite working hard to turn her life around, the record of her past holds her back.
It separates me from my community, and once somebody knows certain pieces of information or different things like that, you lose connection with them, or there is stigma tied to the conviction. And I am a person that believes that human beings are redeemable.
Blankenship says her early life was defined by trauma. Her first experience with law enforcement was when she was 11 or 12. She was with her brother when he used some stolen checks. He went to jail, and she was put on juvenile probation. She says this event damaged her family dynamic, and she was traumatized by the court system. A few years later, her mother was diagnosed with cancer and got a prescription for OxyContin to help with the pain. The first time Blankenship tried OxyContin was when she was 16. Her mother gave her the opioid pill for a toothache.
I think she thought they were just, some low-grade pain reliever. I don't know that she had the scope of what addiction was or what that would cause in my life later.
After her mother's death, Blankenship was placed in foster care, and she eventually dropped out of high school. In her 20s, Blankenship started her own family, but was in an unhealthy relationship. Despite those challenges, she received a GED and tried to go to college. However, she struggled being a parent and a student while suffering from substance use disorder. Eventually, she lost custody of her children, and Blankenship says that's when she hit rock bottom.
I really didn't want to be alive at that point. I really had no purpose. And that's the best way I can put it. When you lose purpose, you lose hope.
Around this time, Blankenship says she had another run-in with the law. However, this time, the situation and the charges were much more serious.
After I went further into my addiction, I was picked up by an officer. Now, he was trying to help, and at the time, we didn't have the community-based services that we have now. And so my view of police is that I was arrested when I was a very young child. My brother was taken from the home. He was put in prison. A lot of my visits with my family member was out of prison. So I was very untrusting. And so in the state, in the mental health condition that I was at that moment, I really wasn't comfortable being there. So I stole the vehicle. And that was my first crime. That was possession of a stolen vehicle.
Because of your mental state, you were in a bad situation already, and you made it worse by...
I did make it worse. And I suffered the consequences for that. I went to prison for it.
Blankenship says after stealing the police car, she had a rough start in jail.
My body's going through things. My brain is going through things. I detoxed in jail for 38 days. Was an extremely painful experience for me. And eventually, I started to have a series of disciplinary actions when I was in there. I was acting out.
While incarcerated, Blankenship was charged and convicted with a second felony.
I went to court, and it was basically trying to smuggle tobacco into the facility. And so at that moment, I was convicted of a second crime during my same incarceration. I actually didn't have possession of it yet. A girl was meeting me at the courthouse bathroom, and she got caught.
Blankenship was sentenced to 1 to 3 years for this and served it concurrently with her previous felony conviction. In total, she spent 2 years in Lakin Correctional Center.
What was it like when you got out of prison? Did you find work? Did you have the support of family and friends?
I did not have support from family and friends because I didn't have any. All of my friends were, not good relationships. And whenever I was released from prison, I prayed about where to go and what I needed to do. And I went to another long-term treatment program where I could then basically build my life from the community. Now, I had graduated RSAT while I was in prison. So
what's RSAT?
It's Residential Substance Abuse Treatment.
Okay.
So I had graduated RSAT. I knew that I needed a support system. I knew that I needed to find, my home. And so I paroled to a long-term treatment facility in Logan, West Virginia. It's called the Marjorie Oakley Home for Women. It's ran by the Recovery Group of Southern West Virginia. I also feel very privileged that I was able to do that and make that decision that I was accepted there. I literally arrived there with a trash bag of clothes from prison. They were like, grays and a pair of flops. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna do everything it takes. They were there for me through the whole process. I actually wasn't able to go to work because of the treatment process for 4 months.
You go through this treatment process, which I imagine it's a lot of counseling and trying to make sure that you're free from the substance, I guess reprogramming yourself.
Oh, yeah, and very, very similar to RSAT. And so I would go to counseling and group there, and so it was really like my second set of cognitive behavioral therapy classes and counseling, but only this time I was in in a new community, a community that was welcoming to me without being incarcerated. So it's a different setting.
And how long did it take till you got employment?
Well, when I got employment in 4 months when I was released, I was working at Geno's.
And so you worked there. How long did you work there?
I worked there a year, but I had 2 jobs at one time.
Right now you work for the REACH initiative. When did you get that job and how did that come about?
So Bev Sharp from the REACH Initiative, she started reentry councils in West Virginia to help people coming out of incarceration and build like community partnerships. And she had a grant, and it was to help with people in the Day Report Center with employment. And so she came to Logan, and she was seeking this person, and Michelle Akers from the Day Report Center said, "Man, I have the perfect person for you." And so she referred me, and I had applied at a couple different places, and so I was turned down a few times. But, when I interviewed with Bev Sharp and Jeff Allen, who's the director of the West Virginia Council of Churches, I was just open and honest with them, and they embraced me for what they seen that day and for all the things that I had accomplished at that moment.
I just want to make sure I understand one thing. The negative parts of your record, the fact that you have a substance use history, the fact that you have been involved in the criminal justice system, in some ways, that's not great history to have. It's not ideal. And yet, on the other hand, the fact that you have that and that you've turned that around, and that there's an organization like the REACH Initiative who basically would like to have role models who can kind of show that it can be done and that you can transform, that in many ways, those are great qualifications for that type of job. But if the funding gets cut for the REACH Initiative, or if whatever reason this organization would go away, then all of a sudden you're in a position where your history is a greater liability than it is right now. Do I have that right?
You do. Yeah, that's right.
That's in many ways why you're concerned and why you would like to do what you can to expunge your record.
I believe that every human's redeemable, including myself, and it's really hard to come back from that because you are facing consequences every day for something that you've made great changes to turn your life around. But, those collateral consequences, they still exist, and they are still preventing West Virginians from going back to work after they've faced consequences for their actions.
Have you worked with anyone who has been denied a job because of their criminal record?
Oh, yeah, it happens all the time. As a matter of fact, a girl I know, not just jobs, but she's been denied housing multiple times and went through long-term treatment, doing well, working at a dentist office, raising 2 kids. I mean, living her best life, and cannot find safe housing for her family.
And in these cases where she is denied, has it been made clear you are being denied because of these marks on your criminal record?
Yes.
Can you speak specifically about what it is?
Felony drug conviction.
We appreciate your application here. We understand that you are gainfully employed and you can pay rent, but we can't have you here because you have these felony drug convictions on your record.
That's correct.
That's what was said.
Mm-hmm.
Amber, in 5-10 years from now, where would you like to see yourself?
I would like to see my record expunged and managing or helping people, directing a program that provides services to humans, that just loves on humans. And that's what I see myself doing, for the rest of my life. Also having my master's degree and continuing to serve at my church that I love so very much. And just living life, really, enjoying it.
The benefits that can come from expungement lead to better employment and housing opportunities, as well as becoming part of a community. However, some people say there are dangers when we give a person with a criminal record a clean slate.
I'm Senator Eric Tarr. I'm chairman of the Committee on Finance for the State Senate here in West Virginia.
So we spoke back in 2019 about second chance laws in West Virginia. And at the time, as I recall, you were one of the lone members who did not support the legislation that passed, I think, back in 2017. So it's 5 years later. Do you still have the same position?
Yeah, my position's not changed. I think that any time that an employer is evaluating an employee to whether or not they're a fit for their organization, that they should have the right to ask any question they want and be able to pursue that answer.
So, for example, lying could be that in a situation where the employer asks you, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Now, the judge would have told me, you can answer no, but you're saying that's a lie.
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely. I'm saying that's a lie, and I'm saying that with passing that law, we have codified, we have made it okay. The government says it is okay for you to lie, even though it poses significant risk. There are consequences for a person's actions, and that person needs to be ready to live with those consequences for their actions. And what that law says is that the consequences go away as long as you're good for a while, even though, especially in this situation, we know that there is a high relapse rate with somebody who has had a history of addiction. So it's not like the risk just went away. It may have went away for a while, but the risk is always there. You have the risk of liability to the employer for those things that all attach themselves to addiction.
We spoke with a West Virginian who had a felony conviction for selling marijuana. And that was something that was eligible for expungement. And because he had that expungement in his record, he is now eligible and actually has obtained a CDL, a commercial driver's license. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that proves my point. That is somebody should not be driving a truck. If you have somebody who was selling drugs, and at least at some point they've been okay with somebody consuming drugs and profiting from it, the responsibility that a person has driving an 18-wheeler down our highways is pretty significant. And I would think that having a history of that kind of judgment problem should weigh in on whether or not you give somebody a CDL.
Even if he had been 10 years sober?
If you're the family that 12 years sober and there's a relapse that is taken out because of his activities driving an 18-wheeler and he relapsed, and you find out that a court ordered to hide that conviction, do you think it matters to them?
I guess I'm wondering, is there a point where, and this is one of the things you said back to me in 2019, I said, should this person always have a scarlet letter? And your answer was, in a way, yes. And you're nodding your head, so I'm assuming you still stand by that.
Yeah. There are moments in anyone's life when you have the ability to say, I'm going to take this path or that path. And it's readily apparent to anybody who's lived in the past 10 years what the endpoints and the repercussions are for a path of accepting drugs into your life as a normal part of life.
I asked Senator Tarr about some of the economic arguments behind expungement. Like many states, West Virginia has a current labor shortage. That need for workers supports the drive to help people with criminal records find employment. But Tarr says business owners have a right to know exactly who they are hiring.
If I'm the employer and I come in and I'm weighing everything that each one of them told me, depending on the position, whatever that conviction was for may have merit to that position, it may not. You're competing against anybody else who's interviewing for that position. As an employer, I should be able to weigh that entire picture. Part of the picture shouldn't be hidden from me because the government has no idea what I'm hiring for. I do. It's my business. I know what risk I need to avert, and I know what values I'm looking for in an employee in order to bring value to the organization. So apply for another job if you don't get that one.
You can't judge somebody by their past. God is the only one out here that can judge somebody like that. There's no difference than us recovering addicts than you sitting there having a glass of soda whiskey or something and going out and driving behind the wheel. You can't hold somebody back by their mistakes. Like, people learn from their mistakes. Yeah, I'm not going to say there's people out here that don't learn from their mistakes and they keep repeating it over and they keep relapsing. But if they're still in treatment, at least they're in there, they're trying to do better. They really are trying. Give them the benefit of the doubt and let them try. If somebody's been clean for a year, 2 years, 3, Let them continue succeeding in life. Don't hold them back because of something they did in the past.
That's Troy Young. He successfully worked with legal aid to expunge his criminal record after a 2013 felony drug conviction. Young spent no time in jail, but his arrest and conviction for possession with intent to deliver marijuana had serious consequences.
My landlord found out immediately what happened. She kicked me out and gave me like a 72 hours to get eviction notice to get out. And I lost my job. Then I lost my car because I couldn't afford it no more. And then when I got cleaned up and I thought I had all these friends, I didn't have no one. And if it wasn't for my mom, I would have been on the street.
Even though he had minor run-ins with the law previously, this case really scared him. Young entered rehab the day after his arrest.
Where did you get the idea that you could go and expunge your record? Who told you about that?
I had a friend of mine named John. He was going to do it, and I got the idea from him.
Why did you want to do it?
Oh, because I wanted to have my career. I was always wanting to be a professional truck driver, or I wanted to go and get my criminal justice degree. So this was always my two goals to do. And felony was blocking me. It was blocking me from doing anything with my life.
Did you go for jobs and you were blocked? I mean, did you go and apply for jobs?
Absolutely.
And they said, what did they say when you apply?
We cannot hire you due to your background. We cannot hire you due to your background. Like, that's all I always got.
Did they say specifically what it was?
They just said, cannot hire you due to your background. That's all they would tell me.
What's that moment like hearing that?
It's heartbreaking and disappointing, and it really gets you down. Like just taking your heart out of your chest and just dropping it on the floor. Because when you got somebody out here that is a convicted felon and they turn their life around, they're clean and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and they're staying on track, and these places out here won't give second chances to people that deserve a second chance. There's people out here that's made mistakes like me, and yes, I made a mistake, and yes, I got in trouble, but it doesn't mean that I should be doomed for the rest of my life, and that's what I felt like. I felt like that I was just cursed because I wasn't going nowhere, Trey, and I kept getting knocked down. The harder I would try, the farther I would get knocked down.
How long did that period go along?
6, 7 years. The whole time that I had this felony over my head on me, it held me back, and I was always down.
How discouraged did you get?
It's the saddest moment in my life. I got to the point that I was going to take my own life. If I didn't have my mom at the time, I wouldn't be here today to be talking to you.
Young, who is now 39 years old, started the expungement process with legal aid in early 2020. Because of COVID delays, it took almost 2 years before his case came before a judge and his record was sealed.
When it got granted, I actually framed the granted motion paper, went to truck driving school. I graduated at the top of my class. I immediately got a job. Drove over the road for 2 years, and now I'm local driving, and I'm loving my career.
Are you ever in a situation where somebody asks if you've been convicted of a felony, and you know that you have been, but you know that your record's been expunged, and you want to be truthful and honest? So what's that moment like for you?
I paused for a minute, and I had to go on my new record now and go buy my new record and tell them no.
That you haven't?
That's correct. Because, like I said, it's confidential, it's sealed.
But how do you feel in that moment?
Like I'm not being 100% honest with the person or the employer. But I have to look at it this way, too. My record, been getting it. Expungement is getting a clean slate, like you're getting this restart. Like I felt when I got my expungement granted, I felt like that I was born again, like I just came out of my mom's womb, and I felt like a brand new man, brand new person. with a second chance in life. That's how I felt.
As Troy says, expungement can change a life. But in practice, it's far from perfect. Staffing and funding shortages make the procedure time-consuming. New Jersey now has a backlog of 46,000 expungement cases. What used to be a 4-month process now can take nearly 2 years. And it costs more. Utah recently boosted the fee to file a petition from $65 to $280. The system is being pushed to the brink. But Marie Bechtel wants us to remember that behind every single case is a person trying for a second chance. You've been listening to Us and Them. Our team for this episode was me, Trey Kay, Samantha Gatzik, and Kate Smith. Thanks to Adrian Worthy with Legal Aid of West Virginia, Beverly Sharp of the REACH Initiative, and Tammy Shamblin with the Office of the Senate Finance Committee at the West Virginia Legislature. Michael Lipton, Tristam Lozow, and Ahmed Solomon wrote and performed the Us and Them show music. Mark Lerner designed our logo. The marvelous people at PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting make Us and Them possible. So do grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the West Virginia Humanities Council, the CRC Foundation, and the Daywood Foundation. Hey, we'd love to get your thoughts about this episode. Could you share them with us on our Facebook page or on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Us Them Podcast. Us and Them was originally developed with assistance from the mentorship program at AIR, the Association of Independents in Radio. We'll see you next time on Us and Them.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.